Namaskar and welcome to our special program, Omicron and Economic Resilience. The new variant of COVID-19 is a variant of concern, and it's causing significant precautionary measures to be imposed, restrictions that are being reimposed by countries that have a consequence on the movement of goods and services and on trade as well as supply chains, and as a result on the global economy itself. So to discuss this kind of impact and how resilient is the economy to deal with these kind of mutations to the virus, we have with us two eminent economists. Let me introduce you to them. Dr. Arvind Veermani is a well-known economist and chairman of the Foundation for Economic Growth and Welfare, also served as India's former chief economic advisor to the government of India. And Dr. Suranjali Tandon is an economist with the National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. Thank you very much for being with us. Dr. Veermani, is the world more prepared now for the possible spread of Omicron?
So let me very quickly describe what I've learned about the Omicron, which is relevant to the subsequent discussion. Firstly, the one thing we know is that it's likely to spread faster, that the transmission is higher. So that is the main point. But the area of concern is not anything else, but the fact that it's discovered 30 different mutations in the protein responsible for spread. And that is very unusual. Normally, one discovers mutations as you go along, 1 or 2 here, 1 or 3 there, but suddenly to come out of the blue, 30 mutations is what has made it an area of concern. And as far as we know so far, the effect on the severe forms of the disease or hospitalization are unlikely to be any worse than what we have already seen. So given that, I would say, I think perhaps people initially are overreacting.
Dr. Tandon, so we've seen that markets seem to have reacted sharply. Once the news was announced already, there was a bit of a downturn in the markets, but then they suddenly crashed as a result of this news. But what would you think? Is this a panic reaction?
So Mark, I'd like to caveat that by saying that the stock markets have pretty much been on their own trip over the last 1 year. In some phases, it's felt as if they've been detached from economic reality or even the human costs of the pandemic. I think this dip that we're seeing in the recent time, it could be a response to the newfound uncertainty from the new variant. But as I see, it'll again sort of correct for any kind of other market developments. So I think it's an instantaneous response, which may peter out over a period of time.
Dr. Veermani, to what extent, do planners factor in the economic consequences while preparing now for the possible spread of Omicron?
The WHO about a month ago said that Europe is now the epicenter of the epidemic. I think much of the economic reaction you're seeing was coming from that, but the announcement of Omicron has just made people very more nervous. Now, coming directly to your question, I think a lot has been learned, but especially I can speak for India, that the lessons have been clearly learned, that there are trade-offs between economic deprivation and risk of infection, which have to be taken into account. And particularly, I think if the risk of severe disease and death is not affected, as seems likely now, then I think much greater role of economics will play than in the first and second waves in India, and probably in much of the other rest of the world, such as US, etc. But of course, as I mentioned, Europe is kind of special because it was anyway going through another wave. And there is really where the source of the problems for world demand, etc. may come. So that will have some effect on other countries.
Indeed, Dr. Tandon, so I mean, it's a balancing act, isn't it, for planners to balance the interests of the economy and to, to understand the medical precautions concerned and from the lessons that we've already learned. There is a feeling, that people say we've already been there, done that, so this is not going to be that dangerous, but one never knows.
Yeah, so Mark, at least if you look at the last two waves that we've had, there's been an adaptation even in thinking from the government side as to how to, restrict activities. And my sense is that going forward, any sort of wave or any sort of strain will be met with a flexible approach.
Okay.
And as you're rightly pointing out, there is a trade-off between economic activity and medical concerns. And to that extent, I think governments across the world are trying to balance that. And it's very difficult to say how each of these streams pan out. So if you look at towards the intensification of the second wave, there was sort of a self-imposition of a lockdown by individuals. And so in a sense, it says that individuals are willing to restrict economic activities and take that cost upon themselves when they know the risk is very high. So I guess it will be both. The government will be a little flexible, as I assume, to let economic activity continue, and then individuals themselves will choose to impose certain restrictions.
Dr. Veermani, the international travel was just going to open up. I mean, across the world, people were, waiting to move around, and perhaps that was going to spur the economy forward in, through the movement of people. But we know that COVID had, despite all the lockdowns imposed and, restrictions on flights and everything, it managed to spread to the entire world. So what do you think? I mean, should the restrictions be reimposed?
Let me start by saying that, in the first wave, origin, we didn't know really, or people didn't know very well that it came from China. And the restrictions on travel from China, directly or indirect, were lifted, in my view, a little prematurely. I don't think anybody is going to make that mistake now. But as on the broader point, I think it also depends. So one, I'm sure people will be more, countries, including India, will be more careful on that. And secondly, it also depends, it's going to be more flexible. There will be a graded response, which includes, the testing and all this. Some of this has already been announced, but there's another dimension to it, and that is the capability, the administrative capabilities of the receiving country. So countries which feel confident that they can quickly and effectively process foreigners may ease off from certain countries quicker than others. So I think that will be an important element. But surely the countries which are seen as the source of the Omicron are likely and should remain closed for longer till we are very sure about the virus.
So these countries of concern then, Dr. Tandon, are Southern African countries, and much of the African continent would, as a result, be affected. But the impact on Africa itself, I mean, after all, it's seen as, a continent that's lagging behind economically from the rest of the world. So, I mean, what do you think? I mean, this would be a further impediment to its growth?
So this is definitely going to be a challenge for the African continent. One major issue, which I don't know if is looked at by many experts, is the intra-regional migration. So a lot of labor tends to move within Africa. And, Africa so far hasn't had a situation where it has to impose such strict lockdowns and has such an intensification of the spread of coronavirus. And so, therefore, it could mean that there are huge economic implications. In fact, the World Economic Forum in 2020 carried out a survey to check on what would be the resilience of households in the face of a pandemic and lockdowns. And it's very unfortunate that households cannot afford food, they cannot afford to go without employment. And so therefore, I feel it would set back the continent in terms of the costs imposed. But of course, it really depends on the transmission of the virus.
Dr. Veermani, from an economic point of view, do you see, because of so much happening in terms of viruses, that it makes sense to invest in virology, immunology, biotechnology? These are vital and prudent at this current time. But the question is, should the government be taking the lead, or is the private sector where this investment should be coming from?
Clearly, health is now at the center of attention of countries, and the longer this thing lasts in an active phase, the more importance is going to be given to it. Of course, we know already in the Quad and in other forums, serious attention is already being paid to the issue of vaccines, and so more variants we see, the more likely there is to be greater cooperation and greater investment in everything connected with health.
Dr. Veermani, we saw in India, I mean, the fact that we have been able to vaccinate 118 crore vaccination doses have been administered already in a country of our size, and that's something that needs to be commended.
Yes,
and we saw that the public initiative, it's a public health initiative led by the government. But the point is, in many other countries, the government has not played that kind of a role. So, I mean, what would you say in terms of, trying to beat this pandemic? What role has to be played? Yeah.
For example, Swachh Bharat, the initial emphasis on toilets and then on clean water. And I think that goes to next phase should be sewage and sanitation more broadly. So certainly India, the current government, in fact, took this major initiative, though such programs had been there before. But I think 2014 or 2015, Prime Minister announced this from the ramparts of Red Fort, so which really showed that the government and he took this very seriously. So yes, we have done a lot, but there is still a lot which remains to be done. And my point was that I think, and the third aspect of education, public health is not just government doing things, but also public health education. So that is an area where we still need to take greater initiatives. And by the way, when I say that, I don't mean only India. I mean, what we found is in the US, the level of ignorance is as great or much greater. When people who have had vaccines in their childhood now say vaccination is bad, I mean, it's absurd. It shows that the education, the understanding of science is really pathetic. I'm sorry to use such strong words, but I have been amazed and shocked by the degree of misunderstanding of science. So yes, that is part of public education.
Dr. Tandon, what lessons have economists learned from the spread of viruses and the number of mutations that are taking place at the current time?
We've learned far too many lessons, Mark, but I think a few that stick with me at least is that there is a great degree of informalization, and I think we swept it under the rug for quite some time until we saw how it panned out for a certain population. I think there's also a sense of what markets can do as opposed to what needs to be done for the general public. So the markets seem to be resilient. Also, the digital transformation, what it means for the economy. So it seems that there has been a greater divide, I would say, because of digitalization. There are some people who are able to access markets better because of their ability to own certain utilities which are digitally linked, and they can carry out business as usual. Whereas there's another segment of the economy which is sort of left in the lurch. So I think that's a sort of key takeaway from this crisis, that we need to sort of invest more in certain segments. Obviously need to work on how the employment patterns should pan out over the next couple of years. And I resonate completely with, agree with Dr. Veermani on this, that there needs to be investment in public health and education. I think over the last year, what we've seen is that children are not going to school, and that definitely will have an impact on the kind of education that they have access to. So I believe that there needs to be a stepping up of investment in public health. And of course, public finances have been affected because of the state's ability to collect on the tax base. The tax base shrinking has a negative implication on tax collections. And that, in a sense, will have an impact backwards on public goods and services.
Dr. Veermani, do you see social sciences being impacted as a result of these viruses, and because human interaction has become much less, the impact of these kind of interventions of nature on concepts of economics which are, because we are now in a digital world, like the concepts of freedom itself are, for one, freedom of choice is being tested.
India could innovate in the social digitalization of social stuff like education and health, partly because we were so far behind, in the quality of education and the quality of health services provided to the rural area. So that for India, that is going to be one big impact that not only will it help us close the gap faster, but it will also help us bring it up closer, because it is impossible to reach the level of physical,
Right.
human interaction on the educational level in rural schools and rural primary health and secondary. But what you could do is supplement it greatly with a digital reach. I think that's going to happen at a much rapid pace. And this also means two things. One is that the government, central and state governments, have to give it much more emphasis on the digital infrastructure. And to me, it's not just the negative elements that, there has become imbalance, but the positive possibilities which really enthuse me, that we could really bring up the quality of education and health services, all non-invasive services.
Dr. Tandon, would you like to comment on this? I mean, there seems to be a paradigm shift taking place as a result of, there's an old way of doing things, and there's going to be a new way of doing things because of the pandemic induced behavior changes. And as a result of that, I'm concerned about things like trade cycles and all. Do they change? Will there be new market dynamics? These are the kind of issues.
So, Mark, there are parts of the economy which have the tendency to go back to being as they were before the pandemic. So there is some spaces where there is behavioral shifts. There are some organizations which have taken positively to working from home, which in a sense means that the dynamics at office are changing, which are not necessarily economics. But on the other hand, you'll be seeing activities which sort of go back to normalcy after restrictions are relaxed. In terms of trade cycles, as you mentioned, I think what might happen from now on, perhaps there would be more thrust to digital trade. Perhaps there'll be economies which deal in digital goods, which would see an upswing. We've already seen that with companies. Multinational enterprises that operate in the digital space have been resilient and in fact have performed much, much better. And so then if they are linked closely with certain economies, those economies might see an upswing as well. So that's the direct impact I see of this.
And Dr. Tandon, do you see would you see investment opportunities in these uncertain times?
I think there are investment compulsions, as I see. We definitely acknowledge that there is a need to invest in vaccinations, in science. And I think for the next couple of years, even if this, the threat of the virus goes down, this will stay in our memories as an investment that needs to be made. I think we also learned lessons from the intensity of the second wave to say that the health systems need to be strong enough to endure such shocks. And I think these two are not just opportunities, but are definitely compulsions as well in the decades going forward.
Dr. Veermani, do you think economists will need to reassess their growth projections for 2022? And if so, to what extent? Yeah.
So let me start with the global picture. I think as the main problem, as I kind of indicated at the beginning, is going to come from Europe, and that's something which had started a month or two ago. Most of your Eastern Europe, Germany, even Netherlands, UK are all seeing kind of the earlier expectation that the infection cases were going down and would continue to go down are not there. So there will be a downward adjustment in their growth rates. Now, looked at from the Indian point of view, there's always a silver lining, because if the world growth, European and world growth goes down, certainly the demand for our exports will go down. But on the flip side, the oil price, pressure on oil prices will also decline. So we always have to balance these things. It's never 100% clear what the net effect is, but whatever the negative effects will be minimized in my view. And therefore we will, I would say that I would not expect more than a couple of fraction of a percent point of change in the Indian growth rate. So my forecast for the growth as of now still remains at 10% plus minus 0.5, which is roughly 9.5 to 10.5%.
What about you, Dr. Tandon? Would you reassess for growth forecast for next year, for 2022?
I think there would be a need of reassessment because these shocks never really pan out as you thought about them. I would say that the IMF have been thinking about this and have already factored in some uncertainties. Because of supply side disruptions, it already shaved off 0.1% of the GDP growth projections. So I assume that if there's any intensification in Europe, that's going to shave off more of the economic growth from these regions, which means that global growth takes a hit.
Dr. Veermani, so uncertainty obviously has an impact on time, because how long will this go on? And that has an economic cost as well. So, I mean, the question that comes to mind, it's difficult with restrictions to get goods to market in time. But at the same time, the medical fraternity is working overtime, and they have been trying to get the vaccines out as fast as possible. So there's a race against time there.
The base is that what I call the scientific method.
Okay.
The big divide which has emerged in my view, which is much more important and much more lasting than the obvious things one sees in the Indian economy or otherwise, is people who believe in science and scientific method, which has key role of data in it, and those who go by beliefs and other things which are not based in actual data, on the ground. And that really is a problem which, I think needs to be addressed, because it results in lots of other problems. It results in this unholy ideological divides, political divides. If we cannot agree, it's been said, that in a democracy, people can have different views, but they cannot have different facts, and in a democracy, if we cannot agree on the basic facts and data, and then of course one could have a different theory or analysis, etc., then it's a really a tragedy. And I would also like to just add, given all your points here, is that we in EGROW Foundation, we looked systematically at the virus from the beginning. We looked at the dispersion of from China. We looked at its spread in India, and based on that, we went through a logical scientific process. And it's not true that everybody got it wrong. We got 90% of it right, including the ones which nobody else in the world did, that there will be pockets of supply-demand imbalances. We said that to the RBI governor. We had a paper on it. We said it to the government. So it is possible, this scientific method. I'm just trying to tell you how important it is, just giving an example, okay? So this is an area which I think education system, India, Europe, US, the education system must teach this.
A final word from you, Dr. Tandon. I mean, the understanding of compulsion, because that's also an act of, measured by uncertainty and time. People without jobs for a long period of time, stuck without livelihoods, they will be forced to, do something to survive.
So, Mark, a lot of transitions have already begun or are already in play. What I think needs to be done is a forward-looking approach to say what is the quality of jobs that we're imagining for people who already were in the process of looking for opportunities, and also those who are displaced. And I want to sort of reflect back on your question of timing.
Yeah, sure.
I thought it's a very interesting thing because economists for the longest time have already been thinking about this.
Okay,
So we have a sense of long-term growth and short-term growth,
right.
and what you're saying is that there are short-term shocks which people are very apprehensive about, and what we look at is long-term growth, where in which we sort of want to factor in growth of vaccines and sort of bringing everyone into the system, which again links back to the point of employment. So I think we're reflecting back to the basics of economics, and hopefully
Okay.
in all these models, we will begin to think of human costs.
We leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Arvind Veermani and Dr. Suranjali Tandon, for enlightening us on this uncertain time because of the variant of concern, the Omicron variant, which we still don't know enough about, but it is a variant that has 32 mutations of the spike protein, so it has transmissibility concerns. We don't know how serious it is, I mean, how deadly it can be, and whether the vaccines we have taken are effective against it. But if the vaccines are effective, then I think that that's half the battle won. Thanks very much for watching. Namaskar.